Hi everyone, this is Jerry. Today we are going to talk about scrap paper. I have so much scrap paper. Some of this stuff is like 10 years old. I'm sure this piece here is at least that old. Some of it, I, I'm sure I found it somewhat pretty at some point, but some of it I think is kind of ugly now and outdated. Um, is that such a thing? Can you have outdated paper? I think you really can. So, my mission lately has been to just get rid of some of this stuff. And so I've pulled out just a sampling. This is just really the tip of the iceberg, but I pulled out some papers here that are sort of similar in tone and color. And what we're going to do is try and create a card with the scrap paper that I have and make it look good enough to send to someone. That's the goal. So I'm going to show you a technique here. I'm going to actually show you a few techniques today using scrap paper. This first technique is one that is very similar to what I saw someone do, and I sure wish that I could think of who it was. I apologize to whoever I saw this from, but I cannot think for the life of me who it was. But it isn't the exact technique that I saw this person do, but it is an adapted method of it. So, what I do is I start out with just a simple piece of printer paper, just cut down to an A2 card size. So, I just use that to build my design on with my leftover scrap paper. And I've started using this roll of adhesive by scrapbook.com. I love this roll. It comes in a giant roll, and the only complaint I have about it is that I wish it was a little wider. It is just shy of being wide enough to fit on an A2 card front. I completely messed that up and got my paper on there crooked. It doesn't really matter. Like I said, it's a little bit narrower than that anyway, and so I'll end up cutting it down in the end as it is. What I do is I use just a straight edge. I usually use this little plastic ruler that I have. You could also use like a Cricut scraper, something like that, to get that sort of burnish down. And then you peel the backing off, and what you're left with is a really super sticky piece of paper. And I mean, this stuff is like really super sticky. I usually use that backing and I lay it down kind of on part of the paper just to give me something to sort of work with so that I'm not getting my hand stuck on it all the time. And then what I do for this first card or for this first example is I cut these little pieces of scrap paper into triangles and then fan them out around the outside edge of the card front. And then in the middle, I usually leave an area there or try and figure out where I want my sentiment. So for today's example, I'm just going to quickly draw a little area here with a pencil just to sort of give you a rough idea of where a sentiment might go. You could, of course, place this right directly in the center, or as I am here, you could place it more toward one end of your card. So I'm just sort of drawing a little circle there just so that I have an idea um, where I will be putting a sentiment, and then you won't have to worry about getting that part of your card front covered. So I like to cut my pieces or my strips of paper as I go, just because I like to sort of vary my sizes. Sometimes I have larger triangles, sometimes I have smaller triangles. It just really depends on, the paper I have. Sometimes I don't have quite as big of a piece of paper left. I mean, you can really get rid of some teeny tiny scraps if you want to go to that extent. And I just kind of dig through and find stuff that sort of matches and cut it sort of in a triangle shape and stick it on the paper. And what I do is I just continue to cut these pieces down and fit them in until I have the entire area around that circle covered with paper. And what I'll do is go ahead and speed this up as I continue to work on this, and I will catch you at the end when I get this completely covered. All right, once you get this done, you can just trim off all of the excess paper around the edges. I usually just flip it over and either stick it in my mini trimmer or use my long bladed scissors and just trim off all of those excess pieces. You can use those excess pieces to make another card. I usually just toss mine in the recycling unless they're pretty large, just because I figure I have to draw the line somewhere, or I am really never going to get rid of all this excess paper. So once you get those trimmed off, you are left with your background. Now, depending on how busy your background is, that will probably dictate what you want to do with the front. This one I felt was a little busy, maybe a little masculine because of the colors, not necessarily. But I decided just to go with a simple sentiment and place that on the front. And this is a picture of the finished card. And I think it turned out pretty cute for using up a bunch of scrap paper. I would not be embarrassed to give this to someone at all. Here are a couple of examples that I've made using this method. This is just a thank you card. I used the same exact method I just showed you, only I die cut out of the center of it and then stamped in the middle. And that came out really cute. I actually even used some matching scrap paper to finish off that envelope there. This is another thank you card using the same set. I think that's from Concord and Ninth, that thank you set. And I just put a bunch of stamping on it and used the same kind of a background there. And then I had this background that I did with some really bright pink and blues, and I used a little greeting farm stamp and colored that in with my Copics and got that together for a niece's birthday. And then this last one is pretty much the same thing. It's just a little die cut there in the middle that I did some embossing on and stamped happy birthday on. And I thought this one turned out really cute too. Okay, moving on to the next card. What I did here was I took some strips of paper that I had left over from a paper pack, so they all coordinate pretty well. And I cut these into strips. Now for this example, I've cut all of my strips in pretty much the same width. There are a couple of smaller pieces like the one I just laid down, but you could definitely use some wider strips, some smaller strips, just whatever you have on hand. Now this example is very similar to the video that I had done a year or so ago. So you can lay these strips on a diagonal. You can do whatever you'd like with those. And they make a really pretty design for a background for any card. I thought I would just quickly add something to the front of this card just to show you how easy it is to pull one of these together. So I did stamp out a couple of butterflies using a stamp set that I have. This is a really old stamp set from Hampton Arts. I'm not even sure if it's available. If it is, I will link it below. But the sentiment and the butterflies are from the same set. The sentiment says, "Hello, beautiful." And I used some craft foam to glue underneath the butterfly wings, just so those wings kind of popped up a little bit. And then I had a little square of, you guessed it, scrap paper in white that I stamped the sentiment on. And I think maybe a couple of jewels would have been cute on this, but for now I just threw this together with the butterflies and the sentiment just to show you real quick how it would look all finished up. And I thought it turned out really cute. And bonus, I got rid of even more scrap paper. Since I had one available, I thought I would pull another card out that I made using the very same method. It's a thank you card that I created with some scrap paper that was left over from another project. And I actually even used a larger piece of scrap paper there to embellish the envelope, which I like to do when I have the paper in a large enough size, just so that I can give it a more finished look. So I thought I would show that to you also. Wanted to also just speed through a couple of other methods that you can use using strips. This has quickly become one of my favorites. In this particular example, you would want to make sure that your strips are cut to about the same width, and then you would also want some varying lengths. So I've got this sped up just because I want to keep this video fairly short. But you take your strips and place them along your card. You can do it either on the horizontal or vertically. And I like to stagger them, sort of like if you think of like the way bricks are laid or tile is laid. I like to stagger them along, and I like to leave just a slight gap between each of the pieces of paper that you're laying down. And the reason I like to do this, you could butt them up next to each other, but what I've been doing lately, and I really like it, is using either embossing powder or leftover glitter to stick in between those gaps. And like I said before, this paper is really super sticky, and so that is awesome for sticking to the embossing powder and sticking to glitter. I have tons of glitter and I'm not using it because a lot of people hate it. So this is a really great way to get this glitter used up out of my stash, because once I get it on this background, it doesn't move. So I just go ahead and stagger these pieces all the way down. Once again, just sort of, working as I go. I kind of trim off pieces as I go so I can use them on down on the card. But anyway, I'll go ahead and speed down to where I get this card finished up so that you can see the end results. So once I get the entire front covered in the paper and I trim down my card front, I take some gold embossing powder and I just sprinkle it all over this card. And you can try to sort of press it in there. I sort of tried to press it in there with the back of that spoon just to get it stuck in between each of those little grooves that were left in between each of those pieces of paper. And then you can pretty much just wipe it off because it really sticks to that paper. So at first I was trying to be careful and I was using this little brush, but I really found that it doesn't come off of the sticky adhesive. So I kind of in the end just started wiping it off. Once you get your powder on your card, you'll just want to heat emboss that with your heat tool. I like to make sure my tool is good and hot before I get it to the paper there. But it turns out really, really great, I think, and it makes a great card base to add any kind of sentiment. I also kind of experimented with some green embossing powder there. This is the silver glitter, and it looks beautiful. The glitter doesn't move. It's a great way to get some of that glitter used up. And then this was silver embossing powder. The two silvers I think were my favorite. I have one last example of a card I created using some scraps. I just inked around the edges of some peach colored cardstock, stacked those on top of each other, and added a sentiment to that. I hope that my card ideas have inspired you to use some of that leftover scrap paper up. Thanks so much for visiting me today. Please also visit my blog called abushelandahug.blogspot.com for more card and craft ideas. Have an amazing day.